The rain on County Road 14 wasn't falling. It was a solid, cold wall that turned the world into a blur of grey and green. Ben Parker's wipers fought a losing battle. His hands, calloused and stained from a double shift at the warehouse, were clenched on the wheel. All he wanted was to get home to his 6-year-old daughter, Maya. Then his headlights caught a shape in the ditch. A dog, trembling, one leg bent at a sickening angle. He didn't think. He just pulled over. He was out in the downpour before the truck had fully settled, his own fatigue forgotten. The dog, a medium-sized mixed breed, whimpered but didn't resist as Ben gently gathered it into his arms, the injured leg hanging limp. He had $47 in his bank account, a daughter waiting for a bedtime story, and no plan beyond the nearest emergency vet clinic 20 minutes away. What he couldn't know was that the woman about to open those clinic doors had walked away from $1 billion inheritance to be there, and that this single act of desperate kindness was about to dismantle both of their lonely worlds. Ben Parker's life was a series of tight margins. He was 34, and most of his life was measured in shifts and deadlines at the Freightway Logistics warehouse, in the 30-minute window between daycare closing and his own exhaustion winning, in the relentless math of groceries and utilities and the ghost of medical debt. His wife, Sarah, had left 3 years earlier. Not for another man, but for another life, one without the weight of his student loans and the panic that came with every check engine light. She moved to Arizona. She called Maya on Sundays. Ben had never asked for child support. The agreement was brittle, and he was afraid to test it. Maya was 6. She had her mother's smile but her father's stubborn quiet. She drew pictures of their small apartment with 2 stick figures and a dog that didn't exist. She'd been asking for one for 2 years. Ben's answer was always the same, a gentle deflection that tasted like ash in his mouth. Maybe one day, kiddo, when things are easier. He knew things were never going to get easier, not on his salary, not in this town. The dog in his arms was a dead weight, a complicating factor he couldn't afford. Its fur was matted with mud and rain, but he could feel the rapid, shallow beat of its heart against his own chest. He laid it as gently as he could on the passenger seat, using his own soaked jacket as a makeshift pad. The animal's eyes, wide and brown, watched him, not with fear, but with a weary understanding. Ben drove the remaining miles to the Cedar Brook Animal Clinic, with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the dog's side, feeling for that heartbeat. The clinic was a single-story brick building at the edge of town, its sign faded, but its lights a blazing beacon in the gloom. It was supposed to be closed. The sign said hours were 9 to 5. The digital clock on his dash read 7:43 p.m., but light spilled from the large front window. Ben didn't question it. He carried the dog to the door and shouldered his way inside. The woman at the reception desk looked up, startled. She was in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a white lab coat over plain t-shirt and jeans, no makeup. There was an intensity in her eyes that had nothing to do with the late hour. "We are closed," she said, but she was already moving from behind the desk, her gaze locked on the dog. "What happened?" "Found him in a ditch on County Road 14. His leg's bad. I don't have much, but I can pay something, a payment plan." The words tumbled out, rehearsed and pathetic. She didn't seem to hear the last part. "Exam room 2 now." Her voice was all business, yet her hands, as she helped him shift the dog onto the stainless steel table, were improbably gentle. She moved with a fluid, confident economy. A stethoscope appeared. Her fingers probed the injured leg. The dog flinched but didn't growl. "It's a she," the vet said softly. "And this is a compound fracture. She's in shock, dehydrated. How long was she out there?" "I don't know. I just saw her." The vet, her name tag read Dr. E. Vance, nodded, her focus already elsewhere. "I need to get an IV line in, stabilize her, then we need x-rays. This will require surgery, probably a pin." She looked at Ben, really looked at him for the first time. He saw her take in his wet, worn clothes, the exhaustion in his face, the worry in his eyes. "It's going to be expensive," she said, not unkindly. "Several $1,000s." The number landed in the quiet room like a physical object. Ben felt the air leave his lungs. He looked from the vet to the dog, whose tail gave a single, weak thump against the table. He thought of Maya's drawings. He thought of his empty bank account. He had pulled over without thinking, driven here on instinct. The reality of the next step was a wall he couldn't scale. I can't, he said, the words barely audible. I can't do that. Dr. Vance was silent for a long moment. She looked at the dog, then she looked back at Ben, not at his clothes, but at his hands, still dirty from work, resting on the edge of the table, at the way he hadn't left. You carried her here, she stated. It wasn't that far. In this rain, it's over a mile from where you said. Her head tilted slightly. Your truck smells of wet dog. You didn't just drive her, you held her the whole way. Ben had no answer. He just shrugged, a gesture of helpless defeat. Dr. Elena Vance made decisions quickly. It was how she'd survived. We're doing the surgery, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. I'll cover the cost. Consider it a pro bono case. The clinic does a few each year. It was a lie. The clinic finances were threadbare. Every pro bono case was a direct hit to her own salary, but the truth was more complicated. The truth was that Elena Vance, born Elena Sterling, had walked away from her family's $12 billion pharmaceutical empire 2 years prior. She had traded a Manhattan penthouse and a seat on the board for this modest clinic and its mountain of debt. Her father, Alistair Sterling, had called it a childish rebellion. Her brother, a corporate strategist, had called it a tragic waste of potential. Elena called it sanity. For the first time in her life, her work had weight, consequence. It was messy and heartbreaking and real. And in Ben Parker's impossible dilemma, the choice between financial ruin and abandoning a creature in pain, she saw a reflection of her own stark, defining choice. A choice the world still didn't understand. She didn't tell him any of that. She just prepped the dog for surgery. Ben waited in the small, worn-out lobby, staring at a poster about heartworm prevention. He called his brother Mark to stay with Maya a little longer. An hour passed. Then 2, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Finally, Dr. Vance emerged, pulling off her surgical cap. She looked tired, but there was a calm satisfaction in her expression. She's stable. The surgery went well. She's sleeping it off. She'll need weeks of recovery, careful confinement. She's not out of the woods, but the prognosis is good. The relief that washed over Ben was so profound it felt like weakness. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, she said simply. Then she paused, as if weighing another decision. She can't go to a shelter, not in this condition, and you can't take her home to recover without supplies, without a plan. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. Where do you live, Ben? The question threw him. Over on Maple, in the Ridgewood apartments. She nodded slowly. I'll need to check her bandages daily for the first week, change the medication. It would be easier if she were nearby. She met his eyes. I have a converted garage apartment behind my house. It's small, but it's empty. It's 5 minutes from here. If you're willing to foster her through the recovery, you and your daughter could stay there, rent-free, just until the dog is back on her feet. Ben stared at her, certain he had misheard. The offer was so far outside the realm of his normal life that it seemed like a trick. Why would you do that? A faint, almost sad smile touched her lips. Because you walked a mile in the rain, she said, and because sometimes the system is broken and you have to build a new one, person by person. She didn't add the rest of her thought. And because I have a $12 billion trust fund I refuse to touch, and this is what it should be for. Ben thought of Maya's face. He thought of the dingy apartment, the looming rent, the constant pressure. This was a lifeline, but it was also a door into a stranger's life. He knew nothing about this woman. I have to think about it, talk to my daughter. Of course, Dr. Vance said. The offer stands for 24 hours. She wrote her personal cell number on a business card, a simple card that read only Elena Vance, DVM, with the clinic's address. No titles, no corporate logos. Call me tomorrow. In the meantime, your dog needs a name. He hadn't even considered it. He looked through the small window into the recovery room at the sleeping animal swaddled in blankets, a plastic cone around her neck. A name made it real. It made it his. Lucky, he said quietly. We'll call her Lucky. Dr. Vance, Elena nodded. Lucky it is. She walked him to the door. As he stepped back out into the damp night, the world had subtly, irrevocably shifted. He had gone to the vet expecting a bill he couldn't pay. Instead, he'd been given a dog, a potential home, and a mystery wrapped in a lab coat. He drove home in a daze, the empty passenger seat beside him feeling suddenly wrong. The next morning, over pancakes, he told Maya about the dog, about the surgery, about the nice lady doctor. He did not mention the offer of the apartment. Maya's eyes grew as wide as saucers. "Is she our dog now, Daddy?" "We are helping her get better," Ben said, a careful, non-committal answer. "But where is she?" "At the doctor's office. She has to stay there for a little bit." Maya was quiet, stirring her syrup with a piece of pancake. Then she said, "We should bring her my blue blanket, the soft one, so she's not scared." That was the moment Ben made his decision. It wasn't logic. It wasn't a careful risk assessment. It was the simple, moral clarity of a 6-year-old girl who believed a soft blanket could solve fear. He pulled out the business card and called the number. Elena answered on the second ring. "Ben, I was hopping you, call." "We'll do it," he said, the words feeling both reckless and right. "We'll foster Lucky, and we accept your offer for the apartment just until she's better." There was a pause on the line. He could almost hear her smile. "Good, pack what you need for a few weeks. I'll text you the address. Come by this afternoon to see Lucky, and I'll show you the space." Hanging up, Ben felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years, possibility. It was quickly followed by a deep, unsettling unease. He was moving his daughter into a stranger's home, a veterinarian who performed $1,000 surgeries for free and offered rent-free apartments on a whim. Who was this woman? He got his first, chilling clue later that day. As he pulled up to the address she'd given, a beautiful, understated modern house on a wooded lot at the edge of town, a sleek black town car was idling in the driveway. A man in a tailored suit was standing on the porch, talking to Elena through the barely open front door. His posture was rigid, confrontational. As Ben watched from his truck, the man's voice carried, sharp and clear in the cold air. "This is absurd, Elena. Playing house with a clinic that's bleeding money, and now you're taking in strays, human and animal. Your father sent me. He wants you back in New York. This experiment is over." Elena's reply was too quiet to hear, but Ben saw her straighten her shoulders, saw the steely defiance in the set of her jaw. The man finally turned, threw his hands up in disgust, and strode back to the town car. As he drove away, he passed Ben's old truck, his gaze sweeping over it with dismissive contempt. Ben sat frozen, his hands tight on the wheel. Strays, human and animal, the words echoed. He looked at the beautiful house, then at the humble garage apartment tucked behind it. The pieces, once confusing, suddenly snapped into a terrifying, obvious picture. The pro bono surgery, the free apartment, the late nights at the clinic. This wasn't just charity. He had wandered into the middle of a war. And he and Maya were now pawns on a battlefield they didn't understand, caught between a runaway billionaire heiress and the empire she left behind. For a long minute, Ben didn't move from his truck. The words hung in the air, toxic and clear. Strays, human and animal. He watched the black town car disappear down the wooded lane. His first instinct was pure animal panic. Grab Maya, pack their things, and run from this beautiful, complicated trap. But then he looked at the garage apartment. It was clean, with a small porch and a light on inside. A safe place. He thought of Lucky, sleeping in a cage at the clinic, depending on them. He thought of the relieved joy on his daughter's face when he'd told her they were going to help the dog. His own fear wasn't a good enough reason to take that away. He took a deep breath and got out of the truck. Elena was waiting by the garage door, her arms crossed. She looked pale, but her expression was determinedly neutral. "I owe you an explanation," she said, before he could speak. "You don't owe me anything," Ben replied, his voice tighter than he intended, "but an explanation would be good." She nodded, gesturing for him to follow her inside the main house. The interior was nothing like he expected. It wasn't the sterile, modern showroom he associated with wealth. It was warm, lived in. Books were stacked on floors, a well-woved sofa was draped with a knit blanket, and the walls were covered not with expensive art, but with framed photographs of animals, dogs, cats, even a goat, with their families. The only hint of extraordinary means was the view, a wall of glass looking out over a private, wooded ravine. "That was Michael Croft," she began, putting a kettle on the stove in the open kitchen. "My father's chief of operations. My family runs Sterling Pharmaceuticals. She said the name as if expecting him to recognize it. He didn't. She saw his blank look and gave a small, humorless smile. Right, why would you? They make the medication you probably took for your last headache, and the one for high cholesterol, and the one for arthritis. The point is, it's a very large company. My great-grandfather started it. I was born into it. I was being groomed to help run it. Ben listened, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. The free surgery, the apartment. It wasn't generosity, it was the casual spending of someone for whom money was an abstract concept, a number in a trust fund. 2 years ago, she continued, her back to him as she poured hot water into 2 mugs, I left. I walked away from my position, from the inheritance pipeline, from all of it. I'd wanted to be a vet since I was a girl. They called it a phase. I finally decided it was. I used a small personal trust from my grandmother, one my father couldn't touch, to buy the clinic and this house. To him, it's an embarrassment, a rebellion that's gone on too long. He wants me to come back, to be the responsible, sterling heir. She turned and handed him a mug of tea. He thinks cutting off my financial oxygen will force me to my senses. What he doesn't know is that I'd rather lose everything than go back. Ben took the mug. The clinic, it's in trouble. The clinic is always in trouble, she said frankly, sitting across from him at the kitchen island. Veterinary medicine is a brutal business. Overhead is enormous. People can't always pay. I do too many pro bono cases. My father is probably right in a purely financial sense. It's a failing enterprise. She looked him in the eye. But it's my failing enterprise, and helping Lucky, helping you, that's not a line item on a spreadsheet to me. It's the point. Her sincerity was disarming. It cut through his suspicion. He saw not a bored heiress, but a person who had chosen a hard, meaningful path over an easy, empty one. He understood that choice in his bones. He'd made smaller versions of it every day he stayed in a town with no future for the sake of his daughter's stability. Okay, he said simply. Okay. Okay, we'll stay, and we'll help with Lucky, but I pay rent, something, even if it's just $100, I'm not a charity case. It was a point of pride, brittle but necessary. Elena considered him, then nodded. $100, and you help with the dog's care, deal. The next week settled into a fragile, unexpected rhythm. Ben and Maya moved their few belongings into the small apartment. It was cozy, with its own little kitchenette. Maya was in heaven, thrilled to be camping so close to the dog doctor. Every day after school, they would go to the clinic to visit Lucky. The dog's recovery was slow but steady. She learned to hobble on 3 legs, her spirit returning day by day. She recognized Ben and Maya instantly, her tail wagging a frantic greeting. Ben watched Elena with his daughter. She was patient, explaining things to Maya in simple terms, letting her help with small, safe tasks like folding gauze or filling water bowls. Maya, in turn, was utterly captivated. Dr. Ellie is the smartest person in the world, she announced one night at dinner. New kind of math began in Ben's head. It wasn't just about bills. It was about the light in his daughter's eyes. It was about the quiet solidarity of sharing a meal with Elena after a long day, talking about nothing more consequential than the clinic's cranky plumbing or Maya's latest drawing. It was about the way Elena's focus would soften when she played with Lucky. For the first time in years, the constant, low-frequency hum of dread behind his sternum began to quiet. He learned the realities of her world, the stack of unpaid invoices on her desk, the difficult decision to euthanize a beloved pet because treatment was impossibly expensive, the tears she shed in private after a hard loss. This was the weight she had chosen. It was immense. One evening, as they were closing the clinic, the reality of her family's pressure became tangible. A certified letter arrived, delivered by a courier. Elena opened it, her face going still. She handed it to Ben without a word. It was a formal notice from the town's zoning board. A complaint had been filed, alleging that the clinic's living arrangements, referring to the garage apartment, violated residential zoning codes for a commercial property. The complaint demanded an immediate hearing and threatened daily fines until the unauthorized tenants were removed. The filer of the complaint was listed as a legal firm in New York, Sterling and Associates. They're not cutting off your oxygen, Ben said, his voice cold with anger. They're trying to dismantle your life piece by piece. Elena sank into her chair, looking more tired than he'd ever seen her. They've done things like this before, challenged my business licenses, sent health inspectors on weekly visits. This is just more direct. We'll move out tomorrow, Ben said immediately. I won't let them use us as a weapon against you. No, she said with sudden force. She looked up at him. That's exactly what they want. They want to isolate me, to prove that everything I build on my own is fragile, that I need them. If you leave, they win. She took a shaky breath. I have a lawyer, a good one. We'll fight it. But fighting cost money. Money the clinic didn't have. Ben saw the trapped look in her eyes. She had a $12 billion escape hatch, and her principles were the only things stopping her from pulling it. The following day, a different kind of crisis hit. A local farmer brought in a draft horse with a severe colic. The animal was in agonizing pain. It needed emergency surgery, the kind the small clinic wasn't fully equipped for, and an immediate transfer to the university hospital an hour away. The cost would be over $10,000. The farmer, a man in his 60s with rough hands and desperate eyes, had $500 to his name. He was prepared to put the horse down. Ben watched Elena's face as she examined the massive, suffering animal. He saw the professional calculation, the assessment of resources, and then he saw it vanish, replaced by pure, stubborn resolve. We'll stabilize him here, she told the farmer. I'll call the university. We're transferring him. We'll figure the money out later. Doc, I can't. I'm not asking you to, she said, already reaching for the phone. Ben stepped in. He didn't think, he just acted. Use it, he said to her quietly. She paused, the phone in her hand. Use what? The money, your money, the trust fund, whatever it is, use it for this. She stared at him as if he'd spoken in another language. I can't, that's the whole point. If I use their money, I'm admitting I need them, that this, she gestured around the clinic, can't survive without them. This isn't about your pride, Ellie, he said, the nickname slipping out unnoticed. It's about that horse. It's about that man's livelihood. You have a tool that can prevent suffering right now, and you're refusing to use it on principle. That doesn't make you noble. It makes you as cruel as they are. The words hung in the air, brutal and sharp. Elena flinched as if struck. For a terrible moment, he thought he had destroyed everything. Then something in her eyes shifted. The defiance melted into a profound, weary sadness. She looked from Ben to the farmer to the horse. The principle was a wall she had built to protect her new life. But Ben was right. A wall that let innocent creatures suffer was no protection at all. It was a prison. Without another word, she picked up the phone. She didn't call the university first. She called a private number. James, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. It's Elena. I need a transfer from the Sterling Grant Trust. $50,000 today. There was a pause. She listened, her jaw tight. Yes, I'm sure. Tell my father whatever you need to tell him. She hung up. The horse was transferred. The surgery was successful. The farmer wept with relief. Elena paid the bill without looking at the total. That night, the silence between them in the clinic was heavy. Ben finally spoke. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. You were right, she said, not looking at him. She was cleaning instruments, her movements mechanical. I was so focused on proving I didn't need their world that I forgot why I left it. I left because in that world, everything is a transaction, a calculation. I wanted to live in a world where compassion came first. She finally met his gaze. You showed up with a dog you couldn't afford, and your first thought wasn't about money. It was about the dog. That's the world I want. And if I have to use their tainted money to protect it, then so be it. I'll use every last dime to build something they can't touch. It was a turning point, a surrender that felt like a victory. The zoning complaint was fought, and with the sudden application of a top-tier legal team funded by the Sterling Grant Trust, it was quickly dismissed. But the act of using the money had broken a seal. The empire now knew she was willing to engage. A week later, the second town car arrived. This one was longer, sleeker. The man who emerged was in his late 60s, with silver hair and an impeccably tailored overcoat. He carried an aura of calm, absolute authority. Alistair Sterling had come himself. He didn't go to the clinic. He went to the house. Elena was inside, working on paperwork. Ben was in the garage apartment, helping Maya with homework. He saw the car through the window and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He watched as the man, without knocking, let himself into Elena's home. Ben waited for the shouting. For a scene, none came. The house remained eerily quiet. After 20 minutes, his anxiety overpowered his respect for privacy. He told Maya to stay put and crossed the short distance to the main house. The front door was unlocked. He stepped inside. He heard their voices from the living room. Alastair Sterling's tone was not angry, it was pitilessly reasonable. Sentimentality is a luxury, Elena, one you can afford, admittedly, but it's a poor foundation for a life. This clinic, this town, these people, it's a vignette, a temporary distraction. They're my life, father. A life you bought, Alastair replied coolly. With family money, which proves my point, none of this exists without us. This man, this single father you've taken in, what do you really know about him? His debts, his failures? He is, by his very presence, a liability, a point of leverage. Ben froze in the hallway, his blood turning to ice. Elena's voice was steel. You leave him out of this. I'm merely assessing the stability of your chosen environment. It seems fragile, prone to accidents. The threat was veiled but clear. Come home, Elena. Reassume your responsibilities. This little experiment can be quietly wound down. These people can be compensated. Everyone moves on. No. There was a long silence. Then Alastair Sterling said, Then you force my hand. I cannot allow the Sterling legacy to be tarnished by a slow-motion spectacle of failure or by association with problematic elements. Ben heard the rustle of fabric as the man stood. You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, I will be forced to protect the family's interests by other means, and I assure you, my methods will be far less sentimental than yours. Ben retreated before he was seen, his heart hammering against his ribs. Problematic elements, a liability, accidents. The message was unambiguous. Alastair Sterling wasn't just targeting the clinic anymore, he was targeting Ben, and by extension Maya. The fragile world they had built over the past month was nothing but a sandcastle, and the tide of a $12 billion empire was now coming in. Ben had to make a choice, run and protect his daughter, or stand with Elena and risk everything. But as he looked at Maya's small, trusting face through the apartment window, he knew the empire had already made the choice for him. They had just shown him his weakness, and they would exploit it. Ben didn't tell Elena what he'd overheard, not right away. The words, problematic elements, accidents, played on a loop in his mind, a cold mantra that colored every ordinary moment. He watched Maya more closely. He noted unfamiliar cars on the quiet road. The peace of the past month curdled into a constant, low-grade vigilance. He knew he should pack their things. He knew the smart move, the safe move, was to run. But running meant surrendering Maya's newfound happiness, abandoning Lucky in the middle of her recovery, and proving Alastair Sterling right. That Ben was just a transient problem, easily removed. His pride, a stubborn, quiet flame, refused to be extinguished so easily. Instead, he began to prepare. He called his brother Mark and gave him a sealed envelope. If anything happens to me, or if I tell you to open this, it has instructions. Take Maya to your place in Harrysville. Don't ask questions. Mark, for once, didn't joke. He just said, okay. Ben updated his will online, naming Mark as Maya's guardian. He felt like he was planning for a war, and in a way he was. Elena knew something was wrong. She could feel the new tension in him, the way he'd pause at windows, the extra care he took buckling Maya into the car. 2 days after her father's visit, she cornered him in the clinic's supply room. What did he say to you? Ben, organizing bandages, didn't look up. He didn't say anything to me. We didn't speak. Ben, please. Her voice was soft, frayed. I know my father. I know what he's capable of. What did you hear? He finally met her gaze. The fear he saw there mirrored his own. It gave him the courage to say it. He called me a liability, a point of leverage. He said your environment was prone to accidents. He gave you a week to reconsider. Then he'd protect the family's interests by other means. Elena closed her eyes, absorbing the blow. When she opened them, they were hard and clear. Okay, she said, then we have a week. Ben asked. You're not in this alone, she stated, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. He threatened you because of me, that makes it my fight, and I'm done playing defense. The transformation was immediate. The weary veterinarian vanished, replaced by the heiress who had been raised in boardrooms. A strategic coldness settled over her. We need information. We need to know exactly what he's planning. She made 2 calls. The first was to her lawyer, instructing him to dig into any recent filings, permits, or complaints against Ben personally, driving records, custody agreements, anything that could be weaponized. The second call was to a private investigator she'd used years before, a discreet man named Leo who operated out of Boston. I need a full workup on Sterling Pharmaceuticals' current pressure points, she told him. Legal, environmental, labor, anything vulnerable. And I need it in 5 days. Ben listened, awed and terrified by her decisiveness. What are you going to do? If he wants to play hardball with people's lives, she said, I'll show him what happens when someone who knows all his secrets decides to fight back. The next 72 hours were a blur of tense normalcy. Maya started first grade. Lucky graduated to a smaller bandage and could bear a little weight on her healing leg. Ben went to his warehouse shifts, every ding of his phone making his heart jump. The waiting was agony. The first shot came not at Ben, but at the clinic. On the 4th day, a woman from the state veterinary board arrived, unannounced. Her inspection was aggressively thorough. She found 3 minor violations: an expired bottle of disinfectant, a logbook entry missing a technician's initial, a fire extinguisher 2 months out of inspection. She wrote up a formal warning and promised a follow-up in 30 days. It was a nuisance, a bureaucratic pinprick, but the message was clear: we can make your professional life a living hell. Elena took it in stride. Standard harassment playbook, she told Ben that evening. They want to drain my energy, waste my time. It means they don't have anything bigger on me yet, or on you. The reprieve was short-lived. Leo, the investigator, called the next morning. His voice was grave. Elena, you need to sit down. I dug where you asked. The legal and environmental stuff is standard corporate armor, but I did a deep dive on their recent personnel and contracting. You remember the new distribution center they built in Ohio last year? Vaguely, she said, putting the call on speaker so Ben could hear. The general contractor was a firm called Bryson Builders. It's a shell. It traces back to a holding company owned by your father's golf buddy. Standard sweetheart deal. But the subcontractor for the concrete foundation, that was a different story. A company called Parker and Son Construction. Ben's blood ran cold. Parker, his father's name. Leo continued, unaware. The owner was Frank Parker. He filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago. The company collapsed, but during the Sterling project, his crew poured the foundation. There were problems. Cracking appeared within months. Sterling's people hushed it up, paid off the building inspectors, and had a different crew come in to pour a secondary slab over it. Cost them millions, but it was cheaper than a public lawsuit and delays. They buried it, and they buried Frank Parker. He lost everything. Ben was leaning against the wall, his face ashen. Elena stared at him, comprehension dawning. Ben Parker. My father, he whispered. The memory was a physical ache. His father, a proud, stubborn man who'd run his small construction business for 30 years, coming home one night looking 10 years older. The silent dinners, the foreclosure sign on the family home. Frank Parker had blamed himself for bad luck, for rising costs. He never mentioned Sterling Pharmaceuticals. He died of a heart attack 18 months later, a broken man. It wasn't bad luck, Ben said, his voice hollow. They set him up, used his small company as a scapegoat for their own corner-cutting. The personal war had just become infinitely more personal. His father's ruin, his family's downfall, was a line item on a Sterling balance sheet. Leo, Elena said, her voice tight with fury. Get me everything on that. Every document, every buried report, every paid-off inspector. Already on it, Leo said. But Elena, there's more, and it's about your friend Ben. Your father's people are digging. They've pulled his credit report, his rental history. They found the old medical debt from his daughter's birth. It's substantial. They're also looking at his ex-wife, Sarah. I think they're trying to construct a narrative. What narrative? Ben demanded. That you're financially desperate. That you targeted a wealthy woman for stability. That you're an unstable influence, Leo said bluntly. It's the classic gold digger play, but with a single dad twist. They're laying the groundwork to discredit you and possibly to challenge your custody arrangement if they can show you're exposing your daughter to an unstable environment or relying on the charity of a mentally susceptible heiress. The room spun. They weren't just threatening him, they were threatening to take Maya. Every parent's deepest fear. The air left Ben's lungs. He sank into a chair. "Leo, thank you, send me everything," Elena said and hung up. She knelt in front of Ben, taking his cold hands in hers. "Look at me, they will not touch Maya. Do you understand me? They will have to go through me." "You can't stop them," Ben said, terror making his voice raw. "They have endless resources, lawyers, judges. They can fabricate whatever story they want. They already destroyed my father. What chance do I have?" "You have me," she said, her grip tightening. "And I have the one thing they never expected, nothing left to lose. I was trying to build a life separate from them. But if they come for you, for Maya, I will burn their entire empire to the ground to protect you. I know where all the bodies are buried, Ben, literally and figuratively." It was a vow, a terrifying, absolute vow. In that moment, the last barrier between them dissolved. This was no longer about gratitude or a shared dog. It was a covenant. The following day, the final piece of the trap snapped shut. Ben received a registered letter. It was from a law firm representing Sarah, his ex-wife. It cited changes in the child's living situation and concerns about financial instability and unsuitable adult influences. It formally petitioned for a modification of their custody agreement, requesting primary physical custody be moved to Sarah in Arizona, with Ben receiving limited visitation. A court date was set for 3 weeks away. Sarah had never wanted primary custody. She'd been happy with Sunday calls. Ben called her, his hand shaking. "Sarah, what is this? We had an agreement." Her voice on the line was strained, guilty. "Ben, I'm sorry. My lawyer said it was for the best. He said you were involved with some powerful people, that it could get messy. He said this was a way to protect Maya." "Your lawyer? Who's paying your lawyer, Sarah?" Ben asked, already knowing the answer. A long silence. A legal fund for parents' rights. "I don't know the details." She was lying. She'd been bought. The Sterlings had found his weakest point and applied precise, devastating pressure. Ben hung up. He felt hollowed out. This was the accident Alistair had alluded to, not a car crash, but a legal, clean, brutal severing of his life. They would take his daughter. He found Elena in her home office, surrounded by printouts from Leo. He didn't need to speak. The look on his face told her everything. "They filed for custody," she stated. He just nodded. Elena stood, a storm gathering in her eyes. She picked up her phone, but not to call her lawyer. She called a number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. "Alistair," her voice was pure ice. "Recall the petition, drop all of it, now." Ben could hear the faint, smug tone of her father's reply through the speaker. "I have no idea what you're referring to, Elena, if the child's mother has concerns." "I have the full report on the Ohio Foundation," Elena cut in, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "The cracked pylons, the bribed inspectors, the secondary pour that your own engineers said wouldn't hold more than 10 years. I have names, dates, bank transfers. I know which county official's mortgage you paid off. I'll release it to the press, to the Federal Building Safety Commission, and to every shareholder in Sterling Pharma. The stock will tank. The lawsuits will bury you. And I'll make sure everyone knows you did it to cover for your buddy's shoddy work, then framed a small-time contractor who later died destitute. Frank Parker. Remember that name, father? He was Ben's father." The silence on the other end was profound. When Alistair spoke again, the smugness was gone, replaced by a cold, controlled fury. "You would destroy your own family's company. You started this war when you threatened a little girl," Elena spat. "You have 24 hours. The custody petition disappears. All investigations into Ben and the clinic cease. You leave this town and our lives alone, forever, or I press send. And I don't just send it to the news. I send it to your biggest competitor." She hung up without waiting for a reply. The room was silent. Ben stared at her, seeing a woman he truly didn't know. The compassionate vet was still there, but she was armored now in a ruthless, strategic brilliance born of a lifetime in the halls of power. She had just declared nuclear war on her own family to protect his. He'll back down, she said, more to convince herself than him. The Ohio scandal is a nine-figure liability. It's not worth it to him. And if he does, Ben asked. Then we burn it all down, she said simply, together. The 24-hour countdown was the longest day of Ben's life. He couldn't eat. He couldn't work. He played with Maya, memorizing the sound of her laugh, terrified it would be taken from him. Elena was a statue of tension, refreshing her email every few minutes, waiting for the confirmation from Sarah's lawyer that the petition had been withdrawn. With 4 hours left, her phone rang. It was Alistair. She put it on speaker. The petition will be withdrawn, he said, each word clipped and bitter. The external pressures on your clinic will stop. You have my word. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Good. But understand this, Elena, her father continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You have chosen your side. You are no longer my daughter. You are a hostile entity. Do not expect any further contact. Do not expect an inheritance. Do not expect anything from this family ever again. You are dead to us. The line went dead. The threat was over. They had won. But the cost was written on Elena's face, a profound, silent grief. She had just been formally orphaned by her own family to save his. Ben crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her. She didn't cry. She just leaned into him, her body trembling with the aftershock. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. She shook her head against his chest. It was never a choice. That night, for the first time, Ben didn't go back to the garage apartment. Maya was asleep in the small guest room. He and Elena sat on her couch in the dark, not speaking, just existing in the quiet aftermath of the storm. The dog Lucky, now moving with a slight but steady limp, climbed up and settled between them, a warm, breathing symbol of the chain of events that had brought them here. Ben looked at Elena, her profile lit by the moonlight. He saw not a billionaire, not a warrior, but a woman who had given up everything she was born into for a principle and had just risked the last shred of it for him. The gratitude was so immense it felt like love. What happens now? He asked quietly. Elena turned her head, her eyes finding his in the dim light. A slow, real smile touched her lips, the first genuine one he'd seen in days. Now, she said, we live our lives. The war was over, but the future, for the first time, was terrifyingly, beautifully wide open. The silence after the storm was not empty, but full. It was filled with the sound of Lucky's steady breathing, with the whisper of the trees outside the window, with the profound, unspoken understanding between two people who had just stared into an abyss together. In the weeks that followed Alistair Sterling's retreat, life did not return to normal, because the old normal had been a fragile, desperate thing. A new normal began to assemble itself, piece by careful piece. Ben and Maya officially moved out of the garage apartment and into the main house. It wasn't a grand declaration, it was a practical, quiet evolution. Maya's drawings migrated to Elena's refrigerator. Ben's work boots found a permanent spot by the back door. The guest room became Maya's room, painted a color she chose called sunshine yellow. Lucky, now fully healed save for a slight, enduring limp, claimed a dog bed in the kitchen and followed Maya from room to room, a silent, devoted shadow. The custody petition vanished as promised. Sarah called Ben, her voice thick with a shame she couldn't articulate. I'm sorry, Ben. The lawyer, he said the funding was pulled. The case is closed. Ben, his anger tempered by exhaustion and a hard-won peace, simply said, just be her mom, Sarah. That's all I've ever wanted. The call ended with a truce, fragile but real. With the external pressure gone, the clinic found its footing. Elena, freed from the sabotage, implemented the changes she'd always dreamed of. She used a fraction of her trust fund not as a lifeline, but as capital. She hired a second veterinarian, a young, idealistic woman named Chloe, to share the load. She installed new digital X-ray equipment. But the most significant change was one she and Ben designed together, the Parker Sterling Care Fund. It was named for both their fathers, Frank Parker, the wronged contractor, and Elena's grandfather, the original Sterling who had, in her stories, actually cared about healing. The fund was an endowment, carefully insulated from the main Sterling fortune, that would permanently cover emergency and pro bono care for the clinic. Its first official grant paid for a life-saving surgery for a local family's elderly cat. The family, a young couple with a toddler, cried with relief. Ben, watching from the reception desk, felt a closure so deep it was almost physical. His father's legacy was no longer one of ruin, but of repair. Ben quit his job at the warehouse. It wasn't Alina's idea, it was his. I'm good with my hands, I'm good with logistics. The clinic needs a manager, someone to handle the building, the supplies, the scheduling, let me do that. He saw the protest forming in her eyes, the fear that he felt obligated. I'm not doing it for you, he said, preempting her. I'm doing it for me. I want to build something too, something that matters. He became the clinic operations manager. His first project was renovating the worn-out waiting area, building sturdy new benches and a low play corner for children. He did the work himself, the ghost of wood stain on his knuckles, a connection to his father he now wore with pride. Their relationship deepened not in dramatic leaps, but in the quiet accumulation of shared days. It was in the way he learned she took her coffee black, but loved a single piece of dark chocolate with it. It was in the way she instinctively knew when his old grief over his father resurfaced and would simply sit with him in the garden. It was in the way he talked to Maya about her mother, keeping Sarah's presence alive and respectful, and Alina supported it without a hint of jealousy. They were building a family, not replacing one. Lucky was the glue. The dog, who had been a symbol of helplessness, became the embodiment of their second chance. Maya taught her tricks. Ben took her on long walks. Alina would often find the dog asleep at her feet while she did paperwork. One evening, Ben found a research article Alina had left open on her laptop. It was about the psychological benefits of pet ownership, how caring for a rescued animal could combat loneliness and foster a sense of purpose. He didn't mention it. He just made her coffee the next morning and placed a piece of dark chocolate beside the mug. A year passed, then another. The clinic thrived, becoming a community hub. The billionaire vet rumor occasionally surfaced in town gossip, but Alina's relentless dedication and Ben's grounded presence reframed the narrative. She wasn't a dilettante, she was their doctor. He wasn't a gold digger, he was the guy who fixed the leaky roof and remembered your pet's name. On a crisp autumn afternoon, exactly 3 years after the night on County Road 14, Ben took a drive. He was alone. He passed the ditch where he'd found Lucky. It was just a ditch now, filled with autumn leaves. He drove past his old apartment complex, feeling not nostalgia, but a quiet gratitude for escape. His life was so full now, it was hard to remember the constriction of those years. When he returned home, Alina and Maya were in the backyard. Maya, now 9, was attempting to teach Lucky to jump through a hula hoop. Alina was watching, her smile easy and full. Ben joined them, putting an arm around Alina's shoulders. She leaned into him. I was thinking, he said, his voice casual, we never really made it official. She looked up at him, a playful glint in her eye. What, the clinic paperwork? I think our filing system is finally official. Not that, he said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Maya, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, stopped playing and watched, her eyes wide. Lucky sat at her feet, panting happily. 3 years ago, I was just trying to get through the day, Ben said, his voice steady but soft. I pulled over for a dog because it was the only decent thing to do in a world that felt increasingly indecent. I had no idea that act would lead me to you, to this. He glanced at Maya, then back at Alina. You didn't just save a dog. You saved me, you saved us, you fought your own family for us, you built a new world with me. He took a deep breath. Alina Vance, will you marry me? He hadn't planned it, he had no ring, but the moment felt inevitable, the final piece of their story clicking into place. Tears welled in Alina's eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she whispered, then louder laughing, yes, of course, yes. Maya squealed and launched herself at them, wrapping them both in a fierce hug. Lucky, excited by the commotion, barked and spun in a circle, her limp barely noticeable. They were married the next spring in the backyard, under the maple trees that were just beginning to bud. It was a small ceremony. Mark was Ben's best man. Chloe, the associate vet, was Alina's maid of honor. Maya was the flower girl, but she insisted Lucky be the ring bearer, with the ring secured safely in a small pouch on her collar. The dog performed her duty with solemn dignity. Sarah was there, sitting politely in the back, and she genuinely smiled when Maya ran to her after the ceremony to show off her pretty dress. There was no press, no society pages, no Sterlings. It was just their community, their found family. As they exchanged simple vows they'd written themselves, Ben looked at Alina and saw not a billionaire, not a rebel, but his partner. The woman who had taught him that compassion was not a weakness, but the strongest foundation there is. The final surprise came 6 months after the wedding. Alina was going through the last of the boxes from her old life, things that had been in storage. She found a portfolio of her childhood drawings. Among the clumsy sketches of horses and cats was one, drawn when she was 7, that made her catch her breath. It showed a woman in a white coat, standing next to a man in work clothes. They were holding hands. Between them was a dog. And above them, in a child's careful printing, it read, "My happy family." She showed it to Ben that night. He stared at it for a long time, a lump in his throat. "You dreamed this?" he asked, amazed. "I dreamed of helping animals," she said, tracing the lines of the childish drawing. "And I think I dreamed of being loved for it, not for my name or my money, just for that." She looked at him. "You dreamed of a dog for Maya. We both just wanted a home." They framed the drawing and hung it in the clinic's waiting room, right beside the portrait of Lucky. It became a favorite talking point for clients. No one knew the true significance, but they sensed the story in it. The story of how a single act of compassion in the rain bridged 2 lonely worlds, healed an injured dog, exposed a corporate wrong, and built a family from the broken pieces left behind. It was a story that proved sometimes the most powerful revolutions are quiet, personal, and begin with something as simple as pulling over to the side of the road. So what do we make of a story like this? On the surface, it reads like a modern fairy tale, the hidden billionaire, the struggling single dad, the rescue dog that brings them together. But to dismiss it as mere fantasy is to miss the profound, quiet truth at its core. This isn't a story about wealth miraculously solving poverty. It's a story about values colliding and compassion emerging as the ultimate currency. Ben Parker didn't pull over that night because he expected a reward. He did it because it was the right thing to do, in a world that often penalizes people for doing the right thing. Alina Vance didn't help him because she was rich. She helped him because she recognized in his simple decency the very principle she had abandoned a fortune to uphold. The money was incidental. The real transaction was one of mutual rescue. He rescued a dog. She rescued him from despair. And together, they rescued each other from isolation. Their story holds a mirror up to 2 starkly different American realities, one of relentless financial pressure, where a single accident or illness can unravel decades of work, and one of immense privilege, where the struggle is often against the soul-crushing weight of expectation and meaninglessness. They met in the middle, on a rainy road, and built a third option, a life defined not by what they lacked or what they owned, but by what they chose to build and protect. The lingering question isn't whether such a thing could happen to you or me. The question is, what are the small, decent choices we drive past every day? The stray animal, the struggling neighbor, the impulse to help that we dismiss because we're tired or broke or afraid it's not our business. Ben and Alina's story suggests that those choices are the very threads that, when pulled, can begin to reweave the fabric of a life or even a community. The Cedar Brook Animal Clinic still stands. The Parker Sterling Care Fund is now a permanent endowment, helping dozens of families each year. Lucky lived to a ripe old age, beloved and pampered. Maya is in middle school now. Ben still manages the clinic, and Alina still does surgery, though she's training Chloe to take on more. They are not famous. Their story didn't change the world, but it changed their world completely and irrevocably. And perhaps that's the most powerful takeaway. In an era of abstract, overwhelming problems, the most radical act is often hyperlocal, hyperpersonal. It is seeing someone in need and stopping. It is using whatever resources you have, whether it's strong arms to carry a dog or a trust fund to save a clinic, not for status, but for solace. The fairy tale isn't the billionaire. The fairy tale is the idea that our kindness is never wasted, that our moments of courage ripple outward in ways we cannot predict, and that sometimes the family you build can be stronger than the one you were born into. It's the idea that no one is just one thing, not just a warehouse worker, not just an heiress, not just a stray, but a collection of choices waiting to be made. And the next chapter of that story is always being written by someone, somewhere, deciding to pull over to the side of the road. If you found a moment of hope or connection in this story, consider subscribing. We explore the real human truths behind the tales we tell. Thanks for listening.